Okay, so there are two parts that I'm going to be showcasing tonight. There is the design itself, and then there is the plant list. And so I'm going to give you access to both files as view only. And then unfortunately, due to my contracts with clients and as a freelance designer, I cannot give you access to them over the long run. But you can always come back to this video later on YouTube and watch it again. So in your chat, I am going to place these Google links. Give me 1 second while I copy and paste them for you. Here is the plant list for you to view. I recommend pulling up both the plant list and the design because I will be asking you questions about these to keep us engaged. Give me a minute as I do the other file for you. Because this is a large file, I think we're going to put it on here for you. Okay, I am uploading the PDF to the chat box right now. Is everyone being able to get into both is able to open the plant list?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm uploading the PDF. It is a little bit of a large file. Okay, and then I uploaded the PDF design into the chat box. Please go ahead and open that for your convenience. What I'm going to do now is move into a share screen. Make sure I have the right. Okay, let me move some things around. All right, so what we are looking at is a 1/4 acre micro homestead in the historic district of Asheville, North Carolina. Now, something that I want to start off right away is zooming in. Let's zoom in as much as we can right now and look at the topography as a bird's eye view without any of the design. Okay, so if you're having difficulty seeing it on my share screen, I welcome you to go ahead and pull up the PDF and look at the sidebar that says terrain slope. Now, what you can see is that we're not doing the front yard of this house. We have only designed the backyard. As you can see, these orange lines right here are the contour lines. This backyard is very minimally sloped, and it is flat on most areas with a slight slope downward. However, when we get to the edge of this property line right here, you can actually see it in this bird's eye view. This line right here, we enter into a heavily steeped slope, and it slopes into this street right here called Scott Street. So this area, I'm going to go ahead and start out with as a different microclimate because of that slope. And there are different types of technology that we had to implement to be able to grow back there. Any questions about this bird's eye view? Okay, now let's zoom out until we can see most of this design. Now, things I want to bring to your attention before we start talking about specifics. 1 block in the scale of this design is equal to 3.5 feet. Okay, so imagine that in your head. One of these blocks is 3.5 feet. Okay, now this key is important to be able to understand what is going on. The light blue line that is skinny is called a weeping swale. Now we will talk about what that technology is and why we used it in this design when we start getting into this nitty-gritty, okay? Now, this is actually a navy blue, slightly thicker line is called a diversion swale. It's not putting any water into the soil. It's only directing water to a point, okay? And we'll talk about what these two different materials we use to be able to do that as we start getting into the design. This light tan colored is a mulched path. That's very specific because these design clients have a young child and they wanted to eliminate mowing. They no longer wanted to mow this backyard. It was grass before this paved area right here, this patio and this kitchen processing shed. And so we put in mulch paths for multiple uses as well. And we'll get into that when we start talking about the design. Now this like greenish, some people could even call it a brown, greenish brown is a landscape bed. So that means we are specifically layering organic matter in those beds for specific functions. The light blue circles are ephemeral basins. So that ephemeral means that the water is going to fill in these basins and then it's actually going to disperse out into the soil, okay? The water will not stay in those basins. This is not a pond. This is a microclimate, an ecotone that we have specifically placed in this design for specific reasons. And then the orange curvy line is actually a contour line. Do I have any questions or comments about the key for clarification? Cool. All right. Let's zoom out, zoom out, and let's take a look. So I want to start with these weeping swales. This is not technology that I have created. This is something that I have mimicked. Verge Permaculture in Northern California has actually used weeping swales for almost a decade in their designs. And they have a YouTube series, 4 YouTube videos. I'm going to place them in the chat so that you all can. The name is Verge Permaculture. So if you want to YouTube how to do this yourself, you can. And it's weeping swales. So the purpose of these weeping swales is to take, excuse me, the thousands of gallons of water. We live in a place known as a temperate rainforest. Asheville, North Carolina is located in western North Carolina. It is actually in a bioregion that is known as a temperate rainforest. Now, is it actually a temperate rainforest? Some people may say no because of deforestation. However, we still receive a significant amount of rainfall a year. If you go to the site analysis on the corner over here, it may even have the inches of rain a year. Let's see. This one does not, but I can tell you, it does. Annual precipitation, 45 to 60 inches a year. That's a lot of rain, okay? We did the calculation of how many gallons of rain would come off of this roof, and it is in the hundreds of thousands of gallons in a 1-inch rain. And so what this yard was experiencing is that where these black lines start are these ends of gutters. Water was coming and pouring across this flat area in a sheet and then hitting this back sloped area and then heavily eroding this very sloped section of the yard. It was not a good thing. It was pooling and collecting velocity across the yard in that sheet and actually grabbing hold of organic matter and pulling off the site and down to Scott Street. And if you would go down to Scott Street after a heavy rain, you would see organic matter all along the edges of it. This was an issue. They were growing an annual garden here that was much smaller than what is currently on this design. And they were having issues with being able to keep fertility up in their annual garden. So one of the first things we did was put in these weeping swales. Okay, so let's talk about the specifics of this technology and why it's appropriate for this site. This is corrugated piping similar to a French drain. It is not a French drain, and I'm going to say that again. This is not a French drain, okay? It is not using gravel. It is using mulch. So if you are thinking of a French drain, replace the gravel with mulch, and that has multiple functions, okay? So this black line right here that stems from the end of a gutter is actually non-corrugated French drain, 4-inch. It does not have holes. This is an area that does not have plants other than grass and a mulch path. This soil is walked on and compressed, is commonly have mowers over it, wheelbarrows, and so it's clay dominant, so it's going to be compressed over time. I didn't want to try to sink water in there if that was that state of the soil constantly. It would just become a muddy mess. It wouldn't be very fun to walk on. It wouldn't be very functional. So these are strictly non-corrugated, which means there are no holes in the piping straight into this basin. Okay, so that creates an issue, but also an opportunity. So the water is coming off of the roof and it's hitting this non-corrugated piping and is going to collect velocity. All right, that basin was specifically placed there to slow down that velocity so that the water had more time to penetrate into the soil around it. The input is lower than the output. So when that basin filled, the water, and it would fill quickly because it's only 3 feet wide by about 1.5 feet deep. It is not a very large basin, right? It's shallow, it's an ephemeral. We want that water to penetrate out to the soil. The input is lower than the output, which means that as soon as that basin filled, which is going to be quite quickly in a high rain event, it's going to hit a body of water and the velocity is immediately going to slow down. What happens when you slow down the velocity of water? What does it drop?
Sediment and organic matter.
Yes, exactly, Carol. Sediment and organic matter will drop out. So this basin will actually have it filter to the bottom. We have the output higher so that the organic matter can settle down to the bottom of the basin and then the water can overflow out into the weeping swales. This is really important because I was thinking about the maintenance of these corrugated piping. This is over 200 feet of corrugated piping in their yard. That is a lot of corrugated piping to have to dig up and maintain if there becomes an issue. So I wanted to reduce as much as possible organic matter entering into these weeping swales. So not only were these basins put in to create this microclimate, but to also reduce maintenance in the weeping swales over time. The weeping swales also have socks covering them. Who here has had experience with socks on French drains or in corrugated piping? Can kind of give us a little bit of a description. No one? No takers? No one has experience? That's okay, because I do. Yeah! So a sock is a mesh that's actually made out of plastic. It's remnants of what is left over from the corrugated piping that they make into strings and then they weave it. And it, a lot of times you can get some that have metal strands through it, and it actually makes it so that mice and groundhogs don't chew through it, which can be a huge issue. Groundhogs, I don't know if you all have experience, like to chew into plastic where water sits so that they can get access to it and drink. It's not that they like to eat the plastic. Some do, like squirrels and groundhogs and some mice will eat plastic because it is a polycarbonate. It is like a sugar, right? And when they're really, really hungry, they'll eat it. But mostly that sock is with the metal is where they bite it and they can't chew through it because it has metal wires through it. And so it's placed there for 2 reasons: stop groundhogs and mice from coming and making nest and or using it as a highway around the yard, and 2, to stop organic matter from moving into the holes in the corrugated piping, reducing maintenance. Okay, we're stacking these functions, right? We're thinking of all these micro details and stacking these functions. Any questions or comments coming up of what we've gone over so far?
Kara, I was curious with the basins, as you're collecting that organic matter and sediment forms, does that then compromise the depth of the basin, and do you have to dig that out, or is it so insignificant that it won't cause any long-term issues or anything like that?
Excuse me. That's a great question. And let's zoom in a little bit to this microclimate. So you will not have to dig it out. It was designed for that organic matter to build. And what you can see is that there are plants placed along the ring of it. If you go to the plant list and you look at the water basin plants, we use the 2 letters of each of the scientific name to depict in this design what they are. This is something that is called mountain grass. It is a native water-loving plant. It grows short and lush, and it is amazing habitat for predators. And what it is designed is for that to actually cover the bottom of the basin. The basin is made out of Tennessee field spar rock with clay in between. So it's not mortared or anything in there. There's nothing sealing it. There's just pure clay in between. So it's designed as the organic matter sits for those plants to come in and actually cover between the rocks, and eventually probably will cover the rocks, the entire basin in this lush green grass. And so eventually over time, the pond will just maintain that itself. It's not going to be a massive quantity of organic matter that's going to enter, because all of the gutters do have first flushes on them and leaf guards. So we did do precautions before even entering into the basin to eliminate as much organic coming off of the roofs as possible. Did that answer your question, Carol?
Yeah, that was super, super helpful. And it just made me think, if we did something where we're at, our soil is rocky and clay, and so it would be really easy to create these basins where needed, potentially.
Mm-hmm. When I see that you have your hand up, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I do. Maybe I missed it, but where does most of the water come from?
It comes from the roof of the house. It's
And
coming
what type
from
of what type
it's
of roof
asphalt.
is it?
That's why
Asphalt. Okay.
it's
That's
also where we
good.
have the first flush. Yeah.
Yeah, very important. All right.
Yep.
Is there like some kind of a barrel to catch or container to catch the rain first, and then this is overflow going to the?
Nope.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
that's a lot of maintenance. So there are
Mhm.
two rain barrels that we built, actually 4 rain barrels that we built right here, that they're going to irrigate their annual garden in, and their potted plants right here. Just from the footprint of this kitchen processing shed.
All right.
And then everything that's coming off of their house is actually being pushed into this perennial forest garden. And then their food forest in the back terrace. Yep.
And I have a quick other question. Is it just me, or the plants are kind of squeezed on one side and not on the other side? Is it just my screen, or I'm not sure? They're not round. I know trees are not round.
I think maybe it was the way that it was placed in this PDF. Because when I look at it on my Adobe Illustrator, it is not squeezed like that.
Okay. Good.
Maybe that's how the file compressed or something. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions that have come up so far, or comments? Okay, so let's keep diving into it. So we've reached this basin. We've slowed down the velocity of water coming from the roof. We are dumping out as much organic matter as possible. And now it begins to overflow into these weeping swales. Now, these swales have holes in them. They are 4-inch corrugated piping with the sleeve on it, and they're buried into a 12-inch trench and completely surrounded by mulch. What is that mulch going to do in that trench? Jasper?
I reckon it'll decompose.
It will break down. And so this is actually what Verge calls it is a reverse hugelkultur. And so what it's going to do is it's going to massively increase worm activity. Worms are gravitate toward this area. Okay. So the weeping swales are going to keep the area moist, and then the organic matter is going to feed the microbes and worms. And so what it becomes is this fertile, wet trench all along this entire forest garden. Okay, this is the major source of fertility for this forest garden. Any questions about that? That was a pretty big download right there. Okay, let's keep going. So we have all of our fruit trees here, minus the persimmons. Oh, Shanna, yeah?
Sorry, I don't know how to stick the hand up. Could you inoculate those wood chips, or would you not want to do that?
Actually, we did inoculate them. So there's a local company that takes trout from the forest of Western North Carolina and makes a raw fermented fish emulsion. So we use that with a compost tea blend because we wanted to provide minerals in this like really rough organic matter, right? It's really fresh chips that we put into the trench. So we use the fish emulsion to provide those minerals, those micro minerals, and then we use a compost tea to actually inoculate it. This compost tea was from a zone 5, so it has IMOs, which is indigenous microorganisms. So we came in and we provided the food, right, the mulch, we provided the moistness, and then we came in and we heavily inoculated it with micro minerals and then those indigenous microbes.
Thank you.
Do you have to do that? No, you don't, because the IMOs, the indigenous microorganisms, will flourish in this area. It will just take longer.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, great question. Okay, so as you can see, this weeping swale moves down across this landscape, comes to this corner, and then hits this area. This area right here is the overflow. All of the trenches are sloped down, so the water will move and exit out through this overflow, okay? As this side you can see, we have a diversion swale coming from the gutter underground. A portion of this is actually attached to the side of the house because the gutter was really high. And it just randomly ended like 6 feet up in the air and was just creating this massive hole in the ground where it would just out every rainy event that they had. And so much of the uncorrugated piping is attached with brackets to the side of the wall, and then the first flush, and then it's buried underground where it just meets at a coupling here and then comes into corrugated piping with a sleeve. What's really, really key about this specific microclimate and why these persimmon trees are placed here is that this kitchen processing shed creates a really weird space where with the rain barrels right here, there's not much space to like move around and really like harvest or get to it. And the natural growing pattern of a persimmon is actually really tall and straight. And that's why they're planted there. Because if I were to plant, say, a fig tree, which has really long, low limbs that arch out, it wouldn't fit very well in that space. And so what the clients are doing is they're trimming the persimmon up so that they can walk underneath it. And then all of the ones they're keeping are growing straight up. They're not keeping any of the persimmon branches that are growing down or across. This then comes to this basin in this corner. I know that over here it looks like these are 90 degrees. That's just in the digital world. In real world, these are all rounded corners through here because we can put corrugated piping in round corners. This corner, however, is not able to do that. That basin is specifically placed there because if we didn't put a basin there, we would have had to put in a 3-way access port where the top cap would have been accessed from the mulch on the top, and you could be able to come in and pull out organic matter, and it would just have massively increased the maintenance on these weeping swales. And so this basin was placed here to, again, slow velocity in that corner, dump out organic matter, and so that the organic matter was in this ephemeral basin and not sitting in this corner 3-way piece in this that they had to come in and try to stick their hand in and pull out organic matter. It would have been crazy maintenance. And so that basin was specifically placed there. Now the microclimate that it produced made this amazing for these native blueberries and this rutabaga, which is also specifically placed there because there is a clothesline right here. And with a toddler on tow, the mom is commonly coming out here with her toddler. And so I placed the blueberries there to give her toddler something to do while she was putting up the laundry. And maybe, just maybe the toddler wouldn't pull down all the clothes in the process. Any questions or comments that have come up so far? Throwing a lot of information at you. When?
This part of the site is the lowest part.
This part of the site right here is the lowest part.
Okay, and so the other, so there's another weeping tube, whatever, tile going to this little pond there in the corner.
Yep, so this is the inlet and this is the
And there's
outlet.
another one.
Yep.
Okay.
And that is
And
the trenches were shaped to have an angle down to here because that's against the slope right here. So the trench
okay.
was dug at 2% grade down so that it would exit out that overflow.
Okay, that was my question because I was looking at the contour lines and I was,
Yeah, the
is everything
water,
going to this
yeah, the
corner
water
and
flows this way.
getting-
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so from that corner, it's going to the other corner of the where there's the MADO tree, and
Yep.
from the other side, it's coming in, right?
Yep, this is the inlet and then this is the outlet.
And on the other side of the site, where there's the amélanchier and
Right here?
Ire, where there's the other little pond.
Oh, right
thing.
here?
Yeah. Is this an inlet too?
This is an inlet and then this is the
Okay.
outlet. Yep.
So it goes down to this ultimate point where there's another tube that takes it to the other side, right?
Yep. And so like
right.
this point right here is actually the difference between a level grade of a house and then it slopes like that. So if
Right.
you were to do a side elevation of this, that's that point right there. So
Right.
it's yeah.
Just I was looking for the exit point of the whole circuit, and I thought it was the other one because of the contour line. But as you said, if you dug it deeper and brought it to be to the corner, it's in 1 meter distance for the contour lines.
No, I believe this is 10 feet.
10 feet. Oh yeah, sorry, metric. So 10
Yeah.
feet is it's about 2 meters, 2.5 meters. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
And when we get to the terraces, I'll tell you about how in the installation this overflow did not work that way. As we all know, we design and we do a bunch of studying, but implementation can radically change a design, and you have to do stuff on the fly. Okay, so we have a couple different microclimates. We have discussed the ephemeral pond with the native species around it. This is an elderberry, which loves the moist, fertile microclimate that is around this ephemeral basin. And then there are some native sedges, mountain grass, turkey-footed sedge. These are placed there because these ephemeral basins are actually amazing predator habitat, which means that I'm creating habitat for predators to come in and live, to thrive, and to reproduce. Okay, and that's really important. If I'm going to have integrated pest management where I'm relying on natural systems to be able to mitigate pests in my edible plants, then I need to provide a place where they feel safe and they can actually reproduce. And these are specific areas for that. Now, all of this perennial bed right here is also part of that integrated pest management, that IPM. and producing habitat for predators. However, much of this landscape is going to be harvested. There are herbs in here, there are medicine, there are berry plants, there are native flowers that the client specifically asked for flowers to bloom year round. And all of these plants along the edge right here are actually native blooming flowers that will, at one point of the year, there will always be something blooming. And so this is going to be disturbed. It's going to be walked in. The pathway is the weeping swale, so that they can come and put more mulch on it every year, and keep it clear, because you can't, they need to know when they're shoveling where it is. So we just kept it as the access point for that whole bed. But they're going to be coming in here to get into the lemon balm. They're going to be coming in here to get to the mint, to the spilanthes, to the lavender, to the mugwort. And so this is going to reduce the chances of your predators feeling safe to be able to reproduce, which is why it's so important for these native grasses to be around this ephemeral basin, because we recommend cutting grasses and sedges at the very, very end of winter and the beginning of spring, so that the predators can actually nest. There's a lot of them will nest in the stems of grasses and sedges, and so leaving them for habitat for them. Any questions about these plants and the basins? Okay, so before we jump into the terraces, let's zoom in a little bit. Zooming in. One thing that we actually ended up doing, as you can see in the design, there's actually a weeping swale that comes off of here, and this was supposed to water the annual garden, but the inspector came out to finish the inspection for the kitchen processing shed, and it was nixed, and that was fine. It was just an extra add-in for maintenance. This three-way port right here would have had been a lot more maintenance, and so actually removing it was good for the long run. And the rainwater barrels were installed to mitigate for irrigation in the annual garden. But these are mulched paths specifically around all of this hardscaping. This is all patio in 2 levels. So this patio is higher than this patio. And the water moving across this hardscape is going to collect velocity. And this mulch path was placed all around it to stop and slow down that velocity and sink the water into the soil. Also, they have an elder mother who commonly uses a cane or a walker. And so we wanted to use this mulch to give her access where she didn't have gravel, and they wanted a different medium than pavement. And so we use mulch as this highway. What you can see in these boxes right here are actually raised beds, and all of these are filled with culinary herbs. The plants that I have designed in these beds are actually perennial culinary herbs, and I have left a considerable amount of space in these beds. And if you scroll to the very bottom of the plant list, you can see suggested plants, culinary plants. And those are the annual plants like shisho and cilantro and basil that I recommended to the clients to put into these spaces. And I gave them these open spaces in their design to give them the play and the freedom to add things, to take things away, because they are learning about perennials, they are learning about forest gardening and food forest, to give them that chance where it isn't a stacked design that's very, very heavy, but to allow them that freedom to play. What's really cool is that these are actually turmeric and ginger, and they're in pots, and they're placed here because this is north and this is south. And they receive a significant amount of sunlight here, and they're going to be easy to water with the rain barrels from this kitchen garden or this kitchen processing shed. And in the winter, they can be wheeled into the kitchen processing shed and actually protected from frost. Any questions or comments or clarifying desires around this patio space? All right, I'm getting lots of thumbs up. Awesome. Let's keep on booking and moving. So before we move into the terraces, I want to point out this fig tree. This is a dwarf fig tree that was specifically planted in this microclimate because figs in this area are very sensitive and prone to dying from frost. Okay, so a lot of times we'll lose young figs in our landscape here in Western North Carolina because a frost will come and kill it all the way. It won't just kill it down to its roots, it will kill it all the way. And there's a difference. Like in North Florida, you can get away with that wiggle room of putting a fig because a lot of times it will just burn down. The frost will just kill to the roots and it will come back, but not here in Western North Carolina. People have a very hard time growing it. So this aspect of the forest garden has the most southern exposure. And this particular area is actually the warmest part of the yard, where if you sat in the back of the house and you looked across the yard, this microclimate was the driest and the hottest all the time. So I placed a fig here specifically because I was like, great, it's going to be in the warmest part of the yard and it will have it. But I also added more assurance to be able to keep that fig. All of these boulders around here are thermal mass. And so the client specifically asked for an outdoor altar space. We made that underneath here of the fig. What we did is we did actually a circle of boulder of rocks and then instead of doing mulch, we did gravel. And it was this beautiful difference of this dark, vibrant mulch to this white granite marble. And then in that we tucked a bench for the altar and then these big beautiful rocks like obsidian and garnet for the different directions. And it made this gorgeous, amazingly gorgeous altar space, but also it created that thermal bank for that thermal mass. So in the winter, when this fig lost all of its leaves, that gravel and all those boulders were sucking in all that warmth and protecting the roots of the fig. So even if we did, like we're getting next week in the negative numbers, if this fig dies down to its roots, there is still this thermomass that could protect it. Any questions about this part of the design? All right, y'all, we're doing great. Let's move into these terraces and then we're going to go through the plant list. Okay, so as you can see, there are two terraces, upper terrace, and then there's this lower terrace right here. There is an access walkway in between. And if you really, really look in the design, you can see that there are these boxes and these were supposed to be platform steps coming down. So this is a gate. You can see it depicted by these X's right here that you walk through into this upper platform that you can access this terrace from. And then each of these boxes were supposed to be steps going down. However, this did not happen in real life. Okay, this was a beautiful design that didn't actually happen in real life because what ended up happening is this terrace wall has a significant amount of water pressure against it because we placed this overflow from all of the weeping swales in here, and all of it wasn't just this yard as well. There was water coming from 3 other neighbors up above them that was also exiting out through to Scott Street as well, through sheeting on top of the soil and also moving in the soil. And so we actually put a concrete wall in here with rebar that was done by a professional, and it had drains on the bottom to allow a pressure relief so that the wall didn't break and then all of this soil fell into Scott Street. So this, when the excavator came in to dig this trench for this terrace wall, they actually dug out a massive 4 foot by 4 foot by almost 6 feet deep hole right here. And it was something that we couldn't really fill in. And so what we ended up doing is filling it with a bunch of random gravel and boulders that were there, and then mulch and soil, but it was really unstable and we didn't feel like putting a platform step there was an appropriate measure. So what we ended up doing was actually changing this whole design. This became a shallow, long platform. And then there were steps, 6 steps coming down and 1 step into the walkway. That's what that turned it into being. It was made with raw cedar that was milled locally and was done in interlocking, where you cut out notches in the wood and they interlock. I can't remember what the name of that is. But these steps were built extremely strong with bolts and nuts and built in to be able to withstand. And then within them, we filled it with mulch. Now the side over here was left really open and gaping. And what we ended up doing is actually extending out and putting 3 terraces in here and filling it with strawberries. That was our solution. And then so that a terrace ended up just being built over this giant hole that we filled with gravel and rocks, and we put strawberries in it that they had in abundance that they took out of their front yard. Now, if you can look at these terraces, this is a very particular type of design, okay? They didn't want to come back to this part of their yard often. They were like, we want to come back here and do maintenance and harvest a couple times a year. So everything that is grown here is something that you can come and pretty much harvest once or twice, and then that's it. You don't have to keep coming back here. I aligned this the guild species underneath all of the fruit trees, like this pie. This is a pear tree. This is plum trees. This is a hickory, or not a hickory, a hazelnut shrub. These are thornless canes, raspberry and blackberry. This is designed to be able to come back and harvest in bulk, and then cart that up those steps up to the kitchen processing shed. Now they can also do where they can hand it down. They can bring a car down here and park and hand buckets down here if they needed to, because the plants that are on this particular type right here, these are woodland strawberries as ground cover, wanting them to come and drape over the edges even and invite them to come and pick strawberries. This is mullein and mugwort. These grow in patches, and I was encouraging them to grow in patches and so kind of take over. We have potato onion planted underneath here. We have elephant garlic, also known as wild leek, to perennialize and establish underneath the fruit trees. So they had year-round garlic and onions available to them. There's some wild ginger in here as chop and drop. It's really wet and moist. They can come in and they can chop it and lay it down underneath the fruit trees. We did end up planting a comfrey underneath each of these fruit trees back here as well, because she wanted to make medicine from the roots and the leaves. And so we also wanted them to be able to come in and harvest and do their chop and drop maintenance at the same time. So they're coming back here spring, they're coming back here summer, they're coming back here fall, and every time they come back there, they're going to do a bulk harvest, then they're going to do their maintenance. So when we changed the steps, this overflow was supposed to fill these wide platform steps with mulch, and that was supposed to handle the water flow. However, that was no longer available because these became steps that just went down that were a lot smaller. And so what we ended up doing is moving this overflow to here underneath the fence, and we buried corrugated piping without a cap on it all through this upper terrace. And what that would do is just irrigate this upper terrace. This mulch walkway would soak in and hold water, and as the water moved down, it would irrigate this lower terrace as well. Any questions about this food forest? Questions or comments? When?
How high is the wall at the end to the street?
This one right here?
Yes.
It's about to my shoulder.
I would not try to know how high you are. Maybe
like
5 feet.
Maybe just under 4 feet.
Okay. Okay.
It's a very
That's
tall
nice.
wall. Yeah.
But it's a good height to harvest. That was my question where I came from. Is 4 feet is not that high to harvest. So it's what kind of material is it made of?
This is concrete with rebar, and then
Concrete,
these terrace walls up here are actually cedar 4x6s with rebar. This is a triple stack, a 4x6, and this is a double stack. Yeah.
Mm.
And when you
Must
walk
look
down
amazing.
this, when you walk down this walkway, you can actually touch here and sit on this and harvest here.
That's great.
Yeah.
Must be pretty amazing to be in there.
It is really beautiful. And what was really cool to see is all the neighbors would like come and walk their dogs intentionally while we were putting in and ask a bunch of questions. And then because they got a bunch of chip drops in this area, and all the neighbors then started getting chip drops. And what we're going to start doing is actually free workshops in the area of how they can do this food forest, where these clients are actually already starting to propagate plants from it and give it to their neighbors for free. And we're going to actually food forest this all of Scott Street. That's the long-term vision.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, so you can like walk down and pick plums and apples and raspberries and strawberries while you're walking your dog. It's going to be awesome.
Nice. Thanks.
Yeah. Any more questions or comments about this terraced food forest? Thanks, Jasper. Sarah? You're muted.
What did you say the retaining wall is made of again?
So this one that has like a different texture right here has the most pressure against it, and it's poured concrete with rebar. And then it has probably 2-inch PVC on the bottom that sticks out from the soil out to the street for let out pressure overflow. And then these terraces right here and these steps and the terraces here are all made of locally milled cedar. So it's Eastern cedar. That's raw, it's untreated, and it's from a local mill.
Is it held in place with rebar?
So we drilled holes into there, and then we put rebar through it into the ground. Sledgehammers.
How high are they?
This is, you can, like, for me, this is probably 2.5 feet. It does slope this way, so it's staggered down because of the slope. So this is higher than here. So this is probably about 3 feet, and this is probably at 2.5. So you can walk through this walkway and sit on this. And then this one is a little bit higher because it's a much higher slope up. And this is probably 3.5 feet.
How thick, how wide are the cedar? Are they planks or are they cubes?
They're cubes. They're massive. Yeah. There are 2 stacks here, and then there's 3 stacks up here. Did that answer all your questions?
Yeah,
Sarah?
thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else have questions about this food forest? Carol?
Ira, I'm curious, that terrace and the mulch walkway that's made with this cedar that's untreated, will there be reinforcement that needs to be done as that decomposes, or what's the thought around that?
So cedar in this landscape should last 50 plus years.
Okay, cool.
It has a very, very long life. Yeah. We couldn't find locust, which is what we typically use. So all the local mills were out, so we use cedar. If they didn't have cedar, we would use probably white oak. That was like the next one after. What you're looking for is something that has the tightest grain possible, something that is hard as possible. If you're going to use untreated, which we didn't want to use treated because we didn't want those chemicals in this edible garden. Yeah.
That makes total sense. So thank you for clarifying that for me.
Yeah. And also, as you can, I didn't mention, but there is a cedar border of the same material that's like dug slightly into the ground along the edge of here, because they do have a toddler, and we wanted a distinction between what is a landscape and not. We are going to end up seeding this spring all of this area with a native perennial ground cover, so that they just come in and have to mow it. They're going to get an electric mower, once or twice a year instead of as often as they are doing right now. Last call for specific questions on the food forest before we move to the next.
What native perennial ground cover are you looking at using?
They haven't decided yet. I haven't quite found native ground cover that I like on my feet. So they're pushing for more stuff that's like, I don't know, have you ever seen American cranberry, like the vine? It's like, it looks like a blueberry, but it's very short. Have you ever seen that?
I have not.
So there's like an American cranberry that actually grows like a vine on the ground, and it
Okay.
has very tiny lobe leaves that's like tinted like red or maroon. And
Okay.
they were talking about using that because it does produce a berry. But what I was saying is I think we should do different kinds of clover, because then
Yeah.
they can harvest the red clover, and it's also going to be fixing nitrogen for their annual garden. So that's what we're still in conversation about that, and we're deciding.
Okay. Yeah, I've always done clover, so I was just wondering if you had a different solution than clover. So
If I'm doing it in shady areas, another ground cover I like to use is actually sunshine mimosa.
okay. Yep.
It is frost sensitive though, so that's something to take into consideration.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. So before we go into the plant list, I want to do general questions or comments about the overall design, and then we'll go over the plants and why they were specifically chosen.
Can you give us an idea of how long it took to develop the design and how long it took to get to where you are today, I guess?
Yeah, so this took me 16 hours of research and design. It took me about 8 hours of communication with the client. And then we just did 2 phases of install. There are 6 total phases to get this completely installed. We did the terraces back here and the steps, and we cover cropped the terraces, and we put in bare root trees and canes here, and then we did the bulbs. So we planted the elephant garlic and the potato onions back here. The second phase that we did was actually putting in both basins and all of the weeping swales, because we're going into the water season for us here in Western North Carolina. And so we wanted to begin to store that water, that water bank in the soil right now. And then we put in all of the canopy trees, the elderberry trees, and all of the natives that can handle, or not that can handle, but that actually thrive in overwintering, and they need that overwintering in order to come out in early spring. So like bleeding heart right here, these wild geraniums, the asters in here, the echinacea, the rudbeckias, they all need that development, a root development throughout the winter to be able to come up really strong in the spring. Another thing that we did is we added biodegradable weed cloth or biodegradable weed barrier. It's sheets of corrugated cardboard that we buy and we roll out, and then we put 2 inches of compost down, and then 3 to 4 inches of mulch on top. And then we did that soil booster spray over this entire landscape bed and also both terraces. The terraces will receive that organic, that lasagna gardening or the instant gardening that Jeff Lawton talks about. Once the cover crop is done, we planted Australian winter peas down here. And so they're actually coming back here right now and harvesting the tips for salads. And it's a nitrogen fixer. So we'll come in this spring and just crush down the cover crop and do organic layering over the top and finish planting out. So We have a spring planting to come in and do, and then we'll come in and do summer maintenance and more planting, and then we'll do our last planting next fall.
Thank you.
Yeah. Overall design questions for me.
How much space the foot forest take? How much area?
Let's see, one block is 3.5 feet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's just say that's 6.
So we will say about,
Yeah, six deep by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, so what did I say? It was 6 wide, 6 times 3.5. So it's 21 feet wide. And then we said 16 long by 3.5. So 56 long. So 21, roughly 21 feet deep, and then 56 feet long through here.
talking about, all right. All right.
David, our next design study too that we're going to do later in the course is actually going to be a 4-acre homestead. I think that would be a little better for your needs.
Well, I don't have that much acreage. I'm just kind of like on my design, I'm doing about a little less, probably I would say about 1/4 of an acre foot forest. So that's my.
Any other questions about the overall design before we jump into the plant list? Shanna?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Let's just say you didn't have all those boulders and gravel to protect that big fig. Is there
Mhm.
anything else you could do to protect it?
A lot of times I like to plant it on the southern exposure wall of a house.
Mm-hmm.
Because the house is a great thermal mass. Also, you can protect trees and plants by going underneath the canopy of a large tree. So if you have like a large pecan, a chestnut, a maple, an oak, you could plant a fig on the edge of its canopy. And if you notice, if you ever go out right after a frost and go look at underneath the canopy of a tree, because of the way that evapotranspiration occurs with a tree, it actually moves water during really, really cold times through its system and its pores so it doesn't freeze. And so it actually protects the area underneath it, the airspace underneath the canopy as well. So I like to tuck a lot of like when I was in North Florida, I would tuck orange trees underneath like live oaks and pecan trees because they would protect them from frost as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for clarifying that one about North Florida and the orange trees, because I had that bit of a doubt because my canopy is all like oaks, white oaks, and sweet gum, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
How you call it?
Yeah.
Yeah, sweet gum and a couple of maples. So I was kind of like, can I use the orange tree as an understory? And a lot of people were saying no, and a lot of other people say yes, so. And also I'm putting coffee there too, so
Oh, cool. Shade grown coffee.
yes.
Awesome.
I cannot live without my coffee.
Hear, hear. Sarah, did you have a question?
Yeah. Would you say again what is on the ground inside of the culinary herb garden out the door of the shed?
Right here.
Yeah.
Or right here.
Just the open space,
Right here.
not in between the plants, but right out the door. Just the big square space. Yeah, like there. Yeah.
This is patio. So this is just depicting like patio squares. These are raised boxes.
Are
Raised
those
bed boxes.
cedar boxes as well?
Mm-hmm.
What
Yeah.
are they using for patio?
Just a typical patio that you could buy from Lowe's. It's just contracted out, subcontract out. Yeah.
And is the basin the same as a rain garden?
It is, yeah, I would say, yeah. It's designed, it's built a little different than a rain garden in that it's using stones and not using like gravel and sand layers, you know. But it performs a similar function.
Does it hold water longer because of the stone bottom? Okay.
Yeah. And then that mortar that we used in between, we just got 100% clay and we wet it until we could make a snake without it cracking. And then we used that. I have a picture of it, but it's on my phone and not my computer.
Like native clay or what kind of clay?
It's native clay. Yeah. That we got from the same place we got the gravel from for the thermomass around the fig tree.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Shanna, you're muted.
Cool.
There you
Thank
go.
you.
Mhm.
If the topography or the landscape below the surface here, the subsurface was had like sinkholes or caves or anything, do you think that the weeping swale would be dangerous for like water infiltration, or even some of those circular ephemeral like pond things would be dangerous to water seeping down into like a karst structure? Or do you think they're so high up, like near the surface level, that they're beneficial?
That is really dependent on the site and doing more research on like how is water moving across the landscape, because you might have areas where you could do it, right? So it's really dependent on like where are the sinkholes appearing, you know, where are like what is the landscape showing, how much water is moving across the landscape and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I know like permaculture, a lot of answers in permaculture is like, it depends, right? It's like one of the,
specific.
yeah, it is really, it like, that's why it's called appropriate technology. The appropriate part, it has to do with site appropriate. Yeah.
I figured as much. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions before we go into the plant list? Thanks, Jasper. All right, let's go into the plant list. Y'all get to see my 9 trillion tabs. Okay, so let me just, either you can look at what is on your screen, or you can go ahead and go into the plant list yourself. You can choose your poison. So let me go over what you're looking at, and then we're going to go over the different organization of these plants and why the plants were chosen. So we have the common name, and also in column A is the common name of the plant, but also where its functional place is in the design. B is the scientific name, very straightforward. This is where you're going to go from the design. The first 2 letters of each word in the scientific name is how you're going to coordinate it with what is on the design. Any questions on how to figure out the scientific name on the design to the scientific name in the plant list? That can be difficult for some people. I totally understand. Scientific name is not commonly used. Okay, so category is just talking about what is this category in a guild species, in the guild. Okay, herbaceous layer, is it providing flowers, it's floral, is it a small tree, is it a shrub, is it a ground cover? What type is it? Is referring to what is it producing. So is it medicinal? Is it a wildflower? Is it fruiting? It's a nut. ABP in column E is referring to annual, biannual, or perennial. Column F, is it evergreen, yes or no? Y equals yes, N equals no. G, is it native to North Carolina? This is specific to where this site is. Y equals yes, N equals no. Column H is horse pet. Is it edible and or okay for horses or pets to consume this plant? Y equals yes, N equals no. Column I, height minimum. Column J, height maximum. Column K, space minimum. Column L, space maximum. Column M, sun equals FPS. Is it full, partial, or shaded? Column N, soil, wet, moist, dry. This is not relevant for our conversation. This is a local nursery. Do they have it in stock? Column P is harvest. What parts of the plant do you harvest that is edible? And Q is notes. That's for project managers on site. Any questions about what these different columns mean as you explore this? Okay, awesome. So ignore this ABC. This was placed here in row 3, 10, and 15. These headers, these ABCs are placed here so that because I was educating these clients in a specific way. And I made a couple diagrams for them, and that's what that's relating to, okay? So please just set that aside. So let's start with row 3. Cut flowers along the swale. So the client specifically asked for, again, having flowers blooming year round that she could cut and put in her vase. So I had to research three things. What are plants for the different microclimates in that upper part of the garden that is a forest garden that would fit into the different microclimates present? Okay. Number 2, I had to consider was how long did they last in a vase? Vase. Because I couldn't choose cut flowers that would die in a day. And then number 3 that I had to consider was what time of year did it bloom? So I created a different sheet just for a series of flowers that I sent the client, and she chose from each season 3 plants, and then I whittled it down from there. So this is the selection that we ended up with after that. We have black cohosh, black-eyed Susan, cardinal flower, white top aster, wild geranium, and wild bleeding heart. All of these are native. All of these bloom at different times of the year. Now, what's I really want to point out is cardinal flower and aster white top. Cardinal flower is a red blooming flower that is an amazing pollinator plant. It is also an amazing predator habitat. What I really, really love and adore about cardinal flower is that it will bloom from midsummer all the way into fall, and it lasts a really long time. So it's going to be a flower that's going to stay in the landscape, and it's going to provide habitat and pollen for a really long time. I also really like cardinal flower because hummingbirds adore it, and that you can sit on that patio in that design and actually look at the cardinal flower, which here, let's pull that up. Cardinal flower is right here, the Lobatia. So they can be working in their annual garden, they can be sitting on their patio, and they can see these hummingbirds and their cardinal flowers. That was super important for me because I love watching these little dragons, and I know that their toddler were too. I have met their toddler, I adore their toddler, and I did design certain things for that little human. More than just the blueberries. Okay. Another important plant is this white top aster. if we go to this design, you can actually see that the white top aster is placed in almost around every single fruit tree. And that's because this native wildflower is an amazing predator habitat for a specific species of predator that loves to eat aphids. And so I love to pair this little tiny white flower that's super easy to grow and super abundant in Western North Carolina with fruit trees. A common flower that is used in annual gardens and in market gardens is Allison. Is it? I don't know if I'm saying that right. Sarah, am I saying that right? Allison, the Alyssium.
Alyssum.
Alyssum. So this is like the native version of that. So I really like to use it in the same ways as that. Let's go back to our plant list. Wild geranium and wild bleeding heart were chosen because they're beautiful flowers that have different ways of growing than a normal like black-eyed Susan or a cardinal flower. They are droopy, they're gorgeous, and they last a long time in vases. Any questions about rows 3 through 9? Shanna?
Just to confirm, the alyssum is a native that you would plant by the fruit trees for pest control?
The white top aster is.
Okay.
The Allison is what is an annual flower that is commonly used in like market gardens and in annual gardens.
Okay.
Yeah.
For pest control or just, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it helps a lot with lettuces in that early spring.
Cool.
All right, so rows 10 through 14. A really key part of this design is that it is small. This is not a large footprint, and we wanted to plant as many trees as we could get in there. So what you are seeing on all of these, this fig is also a dwarf, is every single one of them is a dwarf tree. Okay, there is nothing that's going to get larger than a 12-foot canopy size and no higher than 15 foot tall. Okay, we will be coming back and doing continual education with the client so they know how to these trees are designed to be pruned because of the aspect that it is urban. This is not an unpruned forest garden. Okay, so there's different ways that you can utilize trees. You can use them pruned, like you find them at nurseries. You can buy bare root, and you can have unpruned fruit trees in a more wild setting and uncontrolled food forest. This is a pruned fruit tree that is dwarf. It is very specific for them to be able to manage and not have an ungrown, wild, unmanageable fruit tree. They don't have the size for that. They don't have the lot size for it, the acreage for it. So they have dwarf trees. They have dwarf trees they're going to prune. These are fruits that the client likes to eat. And so that's what was chosen. Any questions about rows 11 through 14? Okay, awesome. So let's go down to rows 16 through 21. And so these are all the shrub layers placed throughout the design. This rose mallow, also known as Rose of Sharon, was on site. And so we just went ahead and incorporated that into the design. The shrub, we also have canes, raspberry and blackberry. They're both thornless. We have low bush blueberry, serviceberry, a Saskatoon serviceberry, an elderberry, and a hazelnut. There are not a significant amount of berry plants. They didn't want them. They wanted very specific berry plants because they wanted to be able to manage them. And if you go into the design, there's a bunch of blueberries because they eat a lot of blueberries. There's one single Saskatoon serviceberry. It's a Saskatoon serviceberry, once established and grown to its certain age, will produce a significant amount of berries. They didn't want to have to be harvesting all the time. So they wanted to be able to manage it within their full-time life out living in a city. And so there's one elderberry, there's one Saskatoon serviceberry, there are 2 hazelnuts because you need 2 hazelnuts for pollination. And a lot of times when we have nut trees, you'll have what is called heavy mast years and light mast years, when they'll produce a lot of nuts in some years and not a lot of nuts in the others. So I have also 2 hazelnuts, because if it's a low mast year, they can still produce enough hazelnuts where they can have their productive year carry them over and still be producing some as well. Any questions about the shrub layer, rows 16 through 21? Okay, let's go to some guild plants. So we have rows 24 through 44. Now, much of these guild plants are medicinal or edible plants for the family. So if we're looking at things like stinging nettle, which is going to accumulate nutrition and minerals in the soil as chop and drop, but also is an amazing edible plant for the family, all the way to yarrow, which is an amazing ground cover, also produces a good habitat for predators, but also can a strong medicine can be created from it, to spilanthes planted underneath by the apple tree, elephant garlic, ground covers of woodland strawberries in the food forest, feverfew, echinacea, bee balm, lavender, motherwort, mullein, wild ginger, licorice. They specifically wanted licorice. They wanted to try to grow it so that they could dry it. And St. John's wort. A lot of these things was specifically requested by the client, and some I put in there, like the motherwort, the mugwort, and the mullein were all things that I put in there because they make amazing patches that create predator habitat, and also produce a lot of mineral growth in the soil. Any questions about rows 24 through 44? Shanna?
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. I've heard that lavender's kind of hard to grow in our area with the moisture. Did you do anything to like mitigate that or make it a drier spot?
Absolutely. And so remember we were talking about this fig, how this is a hotter, drier part of the yard.
Mm-hmm.
I planted the lavender near here. So it's not straight in there because in Asheville, particularly in this neighborhood, they've been experiencing a lot of micro droughts. It's called are also known as flash droughts. And so in a lot of areas, they're experiencing drought over a long period of time. And in some areas, they're experiencing high heat with little to no rain. And it happens in very short periods of time. And that's what's happening in this neighborhood. I think it's the topography where it sits in the mountain that's on a drier side. And so I actually placed it over here in this open space because it's still wet enough where if a micro drought did come, it won't kill it out. Although lavender can survive and thrive in drier conditions, if it still needs water to make it through some of the hotter temperatures that we experience in this bioregion. And so I wanted to keep it a little more moist so that it could survive through this really like 110 degrees in Asheville. So this neighborhood has a significant amount of concrete and asphalt in it. You know, its thermomass is super high. And so it's a little bit more moist, but it's still getting good southerly light and eastern morning light.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about these guild plants? Sarah?
Did you try to contain the nettle in any way with the little toddler in mind?
Mm-hmm. So it's placed in the terrace food forest where it's placed along other really aggressive growing patches like that. So it's in part of the ground cover underneath some of the canes. So the thornless blackberry. So it's going to have to compete with that.
Can you show on the plan again where the cane fruit is? And is there a trellis for them?
Nope. The cane is designed to go along these terrace walls and to be planted like this. So you take the end and you bury it down. and then you come along those half circles and you cut the year growth off, and then you're just keeping those circles. So that's part of their maintenance. So there's one cane here, and then there's one cane here, and the nettle, there's a patch of nettle here and right here as well.
Cool. Thanks.
Mhm. Any other questions about guild plants before we go to basin?
Is licorice known to do well there?
No. And I talked to them about that, but they really wanted to try it. So I'm not going to get in their way. You know, they're experimenting. They'll figure it out. Shanna, you're on mute.
What does the Spilanthes offer to the apple tree?
So Spilanthes, if you've ever tried it, when you put it in your mouth, it like makes your mouth numb. It's known as a toothache plant. And so because of the way that the flower is shaped, it's a globule flower, it attracts certain pollinators, which actually attracts certain predators. So it's actually the pollinators that like Spilanthes that attract a certain predator.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Wen, did you have a question?
Yep. How do you propose maintenance to the site as far as all the mints and called invasive? I know I use them and people are like, oh, why do you put that there? It's because I want them to do that. I want them to be invasive, but we still need to control a little bit. So what's your approach? What do you tell your client when you show them this and they're like, "Ooh, mint, oh, I'm not sure."
So they wanted like way more mint, like several different varieties, and like we narrowed it down to one mint, and then they actually use a considerable amount of lemon balm in their tea. And so they're designed, if we look here, let's pull up the design, because this mint is actually designed to like intermingle with this comfrey. There's a comfrey plant here and a wild leek, and to be a ground cover underneath this apple tree. So this mint is supposed to take over. The lemon balm right here is, she's gonna cut the lemon balm often. It's because she likes lemon balm tea, and so because she's going to be processing it often, it's going to have to outcompete her.
Because some are really creeping, and like lemon balm, if it goes to flower and to seed, it goes everywhere, a lot more than mints. Kind of they do seeds, but less than lemon balm. So like right now I'm in Quebec, and the climate is very cold. It's probably considered USDA 3 or 4, but you know, lemon balm takes over, and it's very intense. So it's always a challenge. But if my reflection is always, if you use it, then it won't be a problem, because it's something, and using it means chop and drop, often. You know, all of those things. Yeah. So good.
And part of the maintenance of working with these clients too is actually using a lot of these herbs in their compost teas as part of their integrated, as part of their pest management. And so because they are in an urban, like they're very, very urban, there's not much perennial gardens or really much growing at all. It's mostly monoculture of grass around them with some canopy trees, but not very many. They're already having to deal with, and it's just winter, with a lot of pests. And so we have these really, really astringent, vibrant, volatile oil plants too, so that they can chop and drop and actually ferment into a tea to then spray, because that will help a lot with their fruit trees. They're gonna need it.
For sure. And last thing, do you use ajuga? Ajuga is kind of a creeping plant. I don't know. This is North Carolina, right?
Could you type it in the chat? I might be able to like recognize it if I read it.
AJUGA. What's it? What's it in English?
It's the same.
Yeah, it's just
It's also
Ajuga,
called bugle weed.
Bugle,
Mm,
Bug, c'est ça.
I don't. Is it, or do you have any recommendations for that plant?
Oh, it's just a very good ground cover. It doesn't it's like it's a little bit like le trèfle, Trifolium.
Mm,
It covers the soil very well. It
mhm.
does let other plants grow through, but still it gives a really good ground cover. And the flower is like a spike flower. It's in the Lamiaceae family, so it's in the mint family. So you know it really propagates very well, and there's a lot of variety, and it can be mixed with a lot of things at the same time. But it's a very good ground cover, and you can walk on it to a certain degree, like no sports or anything, but
Mhm.
you know you can walk on it pretty often, and it works very well. It's
Awesome.
and it's a bee plant, and it's also edible to a certain degree. You know, everything's kind of edible. You know how to cook it or take it at the right time. But it's one of the ground cover I've been using a lot to diversify from clover. It's
Yeah.
not a nitrogen fixer though, but
Mhm.
it's still very interesting.
Sarah, do you think you could type that into the chat for me? Because I'm only going to remember that if I like actually see the word. That's how
I'm
my brain works.
actually, I am typing my personal faves of ground cover into the chat right now.
Yeah.
And then,
Thank
but I
you.
will write Ajuga as well. I don't think it's native, but
Mhm.
yeah, it's a nice one. And it comes in like different sizes, like the chocolate chip Ajuga has smaller
Yep.
leaves. And not as tall. But I like chrysogonum or green and gold is a
Ah,
native.
green and gold. I use a
No.
lot of green and gold too.
Yeah, it
Those
can handle
yellow
shade.
flowers.
Yeah, beautiful yellow
Mhm.
flowers. And then Mazis is not native, but it's a nice, it has either like a purple flower or a white flower. It's a nice, very low dense. It's not like invasive, but it's not native. It's like walkable. You can totally walk on it. It's very low.
Do you have to mow it?
No,
Does it handle shade at all?
it can handle some shade. It actually, I've seen it get a little burned out in the full sun. So wherever
Maybe
it
it
burned out,
prefers.
we put thyme in those, like in between the masses. But yeah, like on the edges where there was a
Mhm.
little more shade or a little more moisture, the masses like was thriving.
Mm.
Yeah.
I have another design I'm doing that I need more shade loving ground cover. So I think maybe I'll incorporate some of that. Thank you.
Yeah, you might like it.
I've been using some green and gold when I'm doing like more native dominant stuff. So it's nice to have something else in my arsenal. All right, let's jump. We're running a little shorter in time, so we're just going to finish these last couple things. These basin plants are native grasses. They were specifically chosen because of they like and thrive in that specific niche of liking really, really wet and then it getting dry, that ephemeral. This turkey-footed sedge also produces a turkey foot in the fall that produces a amazing bird food and is good predator habitat and also good bird habitat. Any questions about rows 46 through 48?
I don't have a question about the list per se, but I have a question for Sarah and Wen about the Ajuga. You said it's not native to North Carolina, but it's native to what area?
I don't know where it's from.
You might
I
have
know
to
it's like
Google
an
pants.
it's a nursery plant, so it might not be native even to the US. Who knows?
It's Eurasia. Eurasia. So no, not native to North America.
Okay, thank you.
So then between the annual garden and the patio, we have potted plants of lemongrass, ginger, and turmeric that they can move into the processing shed. Going to move to the raised beds surrounding the patio. These are annual and perennial plants that I have designed for them. And then the empty spaces, these are my recommendations, rows 69 through 74. They didn't ask for these plants. These are not plants that they commonly eat, but I put them on here so they could explore them. Any questions about these raised beds? Awesome. So that we're at the 9:08. I'm gonna go ahead and stop this recording.